Good afternoon. It's Tuesday. It's 1 p.m. Eastern, and welcome to Advancement Live. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live network. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Find us at higheredlive.com and join in the conversation on Twitter using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. I'm your host, Andrew Gosen. Today, we're going to be talking about data and social media. What sort of data? Well, not the kind that usually comes to mind when you think about social media analytics or metrics. Number of likes or followers, likes and shares on a particular piece of content, reach, and so on. That sort of data is, of course, essential to developing and refining a content strategy, but it's not an end in and of itself, unless that is, you want to try to argue that there's some sort of an innate value in some of these metrics. I would argue that while these metrics are not without value, they also don't offer a lot of value all on their own. The value emerges when an organization begins to integrate some of the information, this information, with data from other sources in a way that helps us gain insight into the values and the beliefs and the behaviors of the people who are engaging with the organization on social media platforms. In a way, this sort of juxtaposition helps us understand who our audience actually is better in ways that are meaningful to our advancement operations. This is a fascinating and an important topic, and we've got two great guests joining us today to help us understand a little bit better the shape of the opportunity that's in front of us and the challenges that are associated with that opportunity. But before we dive in, I'd like to give a shout out to our Advancement Live sponsor, iModules. iModules software is the leading constituent engagement management provider for educational institutions. iModules delivers an integrated online platform that transforms how institutions strengthen constituent relationships and achieve fundraising success. iModules, we thank you for your support, and we're very aware that we couldn't do this without you. Thank you. And now, on with the show. Big data. It's a term that most of you have probably heard as one of the next big things. Some dismiss it as a buzzword, and others evangelize on its behalf as a development that has the potential to change everything about the way we do our work on behalf of our institutions. When we talk about what we can learn about individuals and groups from their activity on social media platforms, we're talking about one of the opportunities that's available to us in an age of big data. To frame this conversation, let's take a look at one of the core concepts at the root of big data, which is the 3 V's. The 3 V's are volume, variety, and velocity. Let's tackle each of these in turn. Volume speaks to the amazing amount of data that is produced by people's activity online in this digital age. By some estimates, there was a study that came out in The Economist last month. 90% of all the data in the history of humanity has been produced over the past 2 years. There is abundant evidence indicating that this trend is going to accelerate. Variety, the second V, speaks to the range of data sources that are now out there. Advancement operations have long been comfortable with internal data sources that are derived from student records, for instance, or external data that is sourced from conventional sources such as the National Change of Address database. However, in a world in which we suddenly have access to unstructured data that is coming from the activity of individuals online in hundreds of thousands of different contexts, we're confronted with a large volume of data that's suddenly coming in from sources that we're not familiar with and that we don't fully trust or understand. This is data that is not absorbed easily into the highly structured and curated relational databases that have served us so well for so long. For instance, how do we relate a piece of social media data, like a tweet sent by an alumna, with her class year? One of these things, the tweet, is an ephemeral piece of user-generated content that comes from an external network and that needs human parsing to be able to figure out whether or not it's actually relevant to his or her relationship with her alma mater. The other, the class year, is a binary yes or no definitive element of her profile that is sourced from unimpeachable data because, of course, we know exactly when she graduated. This is not an apples-to-apples equivalency. It's not even an equivalency within the fruit family. It's more like comparing wine to a raisin. They're tenuously connected by their joint relationship to grapes, but you've got to understand that relationship and its limitations to be able to do anything interesting with that connection. The third and final of the V's is velocity. The massive amount of data that is produced from this incredible range of sources is now available to us nearly in real time. So the opportunity here, the attractive aspect of that real-time information, is that we can now have a read on the current interests of an individual in a way that we've never really had before, enabling an agile and proactive organization to strike while the iron is hot, so to speak. The challenge, however, is that teasing out the signal from the noise, that is to say, pulling out the bits and the pieces of the information that are relevant to a particular business scenario, is a difficult and very time-consuming process that often has a manual component. If we can find useful information through such processes, it can be invaluable, but this solution also doesn't scale without a huge additional investment of staff and resources. Today's guests, Adam Miller and Brent Grinna, are both pioneers in devising and deploying approaches to addressing these challenges that I just described in ways that enable their organizations, or advancement organizations in general, to begin to tap into some of these opportunities. They've focused on tying social data together with internal data in ways that produce business intelligence that then feeds into the core identification, engagement, solicitation, and cultivation efforts that are the core of our business. So with no further ado, let's welcome today's first guest, Adam Miller. Adam is Director of Digital and Data Services at the Stanford Alumni Association. Adam likes finding insights in data, building great digital experiences, prototyping, and telling stories through great information design. In 2005, he developed the relationship model, a new benefits-based behavioral segmentation model of alumni that provides a data-driven picture of the relationship alumni have with Stanford, and that yields concrete ways to act upon that relationship. In 2009, he began to lead the SAA's social media strategy, including the deployment of community management, social listening, social integration, policy, data, and education. He currently leads the recently formed Digital and Data Services Department at the Stanford Alumni Association, which was founded in 2012 to merge data, social, web, email, mobile, and all digital efforts under one vision in strong partnership with programs across the SAA. Adam graduated from Stanford in 1999 with a double major in music and human biology, and he has been a member of Stanford staff since 2002. Adam, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the show.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and good to be here with you, Brent.
Likewise.
How's the weather out there in Palo Alto?
I promise not to turn the computer to the window again to show you the palm trees. It's definitely wintry, icy, cold here.
A brutal 65 or 70?
What's that?
A brutal 65 or 70 degrees?
Yep, exactly.
It's hard to be out there on the West Coast. So, Adam, as I noted in introducing you, you've been thinking about using data to better segment your alumni population since 2005. Let's start with a very basic question. How does that exercise relate to core SAA business goals?
Sure, what I would do is actually relate that back to our mission. Our mission is to reach, serve, and engage all alumni, right? And that's a pretty huge challenge. Really, we know that all alumni aren't the same, so we have to really think about, okay, how are they different? We know that participation and volunteerism are important at a high level, but is that for everyone? And is it the same kind of participation for everyone? Is it the same kind of volunteerism for everyone? So with that effort, the segmentation model in 2005 and other things we've done since, what we're really trying to do is help the alum, our constituent, have the relationship they want to have with Stanford. So that involves understanding who they are, what they're doing, what kind of relationship they want to have, and then organizationally being able to give them that relationship, right? So those are sort of the higher level challenges and the goals. And then the segmentation model, the relationship model, is one of the ways we can do that. And since we have been doing it for a while, it's given us, you know, not only sort of the data platform to have that, and over the years we've been able to get outside data in, and here and there have been able to, where we can, connect it to social data, and overall sort of use that as a foundation to think about, you know, which segments are showing up and which segments aren't, sort of at the technical level, departmental level, but also at the organizational level. Are there areas where we as the organization aren't investing in certain segments, right? Are investments largely going to some segments out of the model, but not others, right? And for those where we're not investing as much, or maybe we have potential, how do you organizationally address that, right? Do you address that with new program and product development? Do you address that with, you know, changing the existing programs? Do you just simply kind of cut the ones who don't necessarily participate out? So it generates a lot of interesting questions. So it starts from the data, but really becomes sort of important business questions.
And it sounds like that's got not only the virtue of enabling you and SA leadership to make important business decisions that are actually based on data as opposed to supposition, but it's also got a really nice benefit for your alumni audience in that it's about as user-centered an approach to this sort of work as you can get.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that might be a theme we touch on today, as how do we keep this? There are fears about data, there are fears about usage of the data, but one important thing is, give the user the benefit early and often. Give your constituent the benefit early and often, and I think you can mitigate some of those fears and risks.
So you started working on this in 2005, and that was before the mass adoption of social media by the hundreds of millions of people who are out there these days. I'd say that dates more to 2006 and 2007 with the joint launch of Twitter and the expansion of Facebook beyond the EDU walls.
Right.
How has the tremendous spike in the availability of this sort of social data influenced your thinking about your broader strategic goals?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's benefited us in many ways. It's certainly opened up whole new families of data. It's opened up new organizational possibilities where we can do sort of the same things we're setting out to do in other ways. We can fundamentally do alumni relations in new ways. We can fundamentally do customer service in new ways. And then on the data side, since we already had sort of the data ship moving forward, it gave us new data analysis possibilities, i.e. think of the relationship model as a behavioral segmentation model. It gave us new behaviors for that model. There are ways, and again, this is always a challenge to track, but where we can start to mix those worlds, it gives us new sorts of behaviors that we can add into our model. The other interesting thing I would say is by having this sort of structure in place in advance, so in other words, since data came before social for us, it actually gave us a frame of reference, right, to sort of think about, because in the early days, and maybe even still today, measurement is a challenge, the ROI questions are a challenge, right? But early on, we could look at sort of, okay, here are all the behaviors that our alums are doing with Stanford. We've organized them in various ways through the segmentation project. We can then think of, instead of social coming on and likes and comments being in a totally different bucket, either outside our mission or as a corollary to, right? We can think of them more as participation, which is already in there, as volunteerism, which is already in there. And maybe they're a ladder to other kinds of behaviors, right? Maybe they're, smaller behaviors, lower effort behaviors on social, higher effort behaviors on social, just in the same way there are in person and for volunteerism and all sort of the other ways that behaviors manifest. So I think that frame of reference really helped us and know how to bring this new data set in, right? And if we sort of approach that in the same way, that's going to help us in the future too as other new data sets come in. Okay, what else is out there to come? And we can still think of, at the end of the day, we're trying to understand in the best resolution we can the alum's relationship with Stanford and then act upon that relationship, right? So I think it helped us at technical levels again, but also how to frame this and proceed through the social era and into today.
What I find compelling about the way that you've just articulated that is your focus on how current behaviors, some in traditional areas such as volunteering and some in new areas such as social, inform our understanding of your alums' relationship to Stanford. And that's sort of it's a very different approach than the more conventional model of taking certain things that we know about what a person did on campus back when they graduated, which may be 50 years ago, and then inferring a whole range of sentiments and loyalties and priorities based upon that. Sort of the proverbial, well, you studied engineering back in 1945, so we're only going to send you stuff about engineering now. You're dealing with a much more contemporary and behavior-based data set, and that's a very different philosophical approach.
Yeah, I mean, that's exciting for us to think about, to really think about what is that. I almost imagine it as a little cloud that travels over your head, of that dynamic real-time cloud of your interests and your behaviors and who you are at this very moment. It could be things that topical information that you share with others at that moment, behavior thing, long-time connections like your class year or the dorm you lived in, where you're from. There's so much about you. If we can get that full and accurate picture of you that's dynamic over time, I think that gets us into sort of the holy grail goal for the engagement world, certainly, is that level of relevance, right, where you're nailing it like an Amazon.com recommendation engine, right? You're not getting it wrong too often, hopefully, but you're nailing it at the level of relevance that we're sort of keeping up with you and giving you some of that magic, right, that's giving you, oh gosh, this is what I'm looking for. These are the kinds of people I'm looking for. Maybe these are the kind of job offers, or these are the kind of volunteer opportunities, right? I think we could get really good at that because we have the luxury, which others certainly out in the for-profit world don't, of having this level of data, both external and internal, that we can use. And so I think the challenge is just how to use it, what are the systems in place to use it, and then how to, again, keep that really user-focused, let the end user, the constituents, see that benefit early and often.
In a way, hearing you talk, I'm thinking that there are actually significant parallels between the sorts of information that you're talking about and the sorts of information that traditionally has been gathered in the form of contact reports when gift officers are out on the road and they're talking to prospects and they're coming back and they're filing a report on what they talked about, right? But that's something that is fundamentally an individual exercise that relates to a particular visit with a particular individual.
Right.
And you're talking about a data set that actually lets you begin to develop this kind of understanding of a much broader swath of your audience.
Right.
Than if you're relying on one-on-one interactions like that.
Right, right. And even back to what I was saying earlier, when you think of it in terms of having some of these segment families that aren't the folks we know as well, they might not be getting visited, they might not be showing up to sort of the traditional events, they're doing fundamentally different things, really, or they still feel good about the institution. They still want to engage, but they just have different ways they do it. And when we know this not from just what they say, it's more from their actual behavior. What consistently over time they're voting with their feet, right? So how do you sort of engage them? It's a really different way to do that. And that's where social gets really exciting. There could be ways to have a very relevant, high-touch experience for those folks in the way that they want to engage with Stanford that we've never been able to do institutionally. And I think the data leads us in that direction, right?
Have you faced any internal skepticism about whether or not social data constitutes legitimate data?
You know, we really haven't. I don't know if it's being here in Silicon Valley and staff actually being fairly savvy all the way up to our leadership level. They've really embraced at all levels of this organization both the data and the social. So I think that's been great. We haven't had skepticism. I think we've had just, you know, wow, all of this sounds great, but how on earth are we going to do it, right? Just we're a nonprofit like all others. Higher ed is usually strapped in certainly resource ways, but also staff time ways. So how do we make this a reality sort of at the practical level to give people immediate benefits right now to they're literally planning an event and trying to narrow down a population of who they're going to invite to that event, right? Can we help them with some intelligence to figure out, okay, what segments can you pretty safely cut out here if you're trying to reduce the cost of your mailing, right? Like very practical things. Then all the way on up to the other side, which is, oh wow, at the organizational level, is there anything we could contribute sort of to the management as they sit down with some of these big questions? Well, you know, what is the data showing us to further sort of some of these bigger questions about maybe how we invest over time for the organization, how we handle some of these other segments. What are these little ways we can try to put some money into experiments maybe, and social has been a bit of that, just to say, wow, do we think that maybe social media could be a way to engage some of these segments in the behavioral segmentation model that don't tend to show up to the in-person traditional alumni events, right? So that's been exciting.
It sounds like the formation of the Digital and Data Services Department in a large part is a result of the sort of emergence of this world of big data. I talked briefly earlier on about the challenge of relating highly structured internal data to the completely chaotic sea of external data. How has your team set about grappling with this particular issue?
Yeah, that's a good question. We you know, have the same system challenges that others do. Okay, what is the best system to use? A lot of us have multiple data sources within our own organizations and across campus. Multiple data sources now outside. So I think it's kind of funny you say chaotic, because I think sometimes the internal can be just as chaotic as the external, but in different ways. And what I mean by that is just, okay, there's a lot of institutional, I'm sure Brent knows this well, there's a lot of institutional sort of meta information, if you will, that goes with that data of why was it tracked in this spreadsheet, what does that coding actually mean. So there aren't sort of standards that actually may be a little better in external data, as people have been working more to try to make systems talk. So there's a little bit of a challenge there, which might mean, you know, folks having to go back and maybe add some more metadata to internal data to sort of normalize it across, and also work within institutions to try and figure out how do you make these legacy data systems talk. So there's sort of a lot on the systems front to make that work, and you know, progress over time. There's a lot of progress being made, but you know, you wonder if eventually some of our systems will be able to abstract this data, whether it's coming from internal or external, and sort of have that layer of metadata that sort of unifies it, right? And then makes, you know, gives some nice food to an intelligence engine to be able to churn out those recommendations, or gives food to that communications tool that is able to sort of, you know, dynamically combine something and send you the most relevant thing we can send you at any given time. So those are the kind of things we're talking about. It's sort of the, okay, at the systems level, what can we do? But then also at the, how do you handle that sort of metadata problem, right? Once again, I like to tell people this is a good problem to have. Like, we have, you know, amazing data, we have amazing content, quite frankly, if you think of what's going on all across your campus and at schools and institutes. Gosh, if we could get everybody on the same page to be able to tag things in even in the same ways, you know, or to put that metadata on, we could then, wow, we could really source some really cool content, match it with the right people, match it with the right event, and so on. So.
Cool. So we're going to move on to talk to Brent in a second, but as we conclude this segment of the show, could you give us an example of a situation in which your team's work with social data has delivered a clear win to a particular program area?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me actually give you two quick examples of different kinds. I think you know we are in the Stanford Alumni Association, separate unit from our development office. We both are have our own VPs that report up to the president. But so let me give you an engagement example, and then one example, just because I know fundraising piece is important to folks, an area where we dabble a little in this, where we raise funds for our Stanford magazine and sort of a voluntary contribution campaign. So kudos to my great manager of data analysis, Jeremy, who has over years been working with the magazine group to sort of find the best pipeline of folks who are not donors currently to the magazine, but might be, you know, behaviorally the most like the donors that we can sort of use to build our non-donor pipeline over time. And so this has been an exercise of using lots of different data sets, which has been kind of fascinating. One of those data sets is the relationship model, so use our behavioral segmentation model, but he's also combined that with some click data that's been a proxy for social. So people who have been interested in either the magazine Facebook page before we merge that into our own, certain content that's shared on social media, and things like usage of the app if they click through a link to get to the actual downloadable app that they can get on the App Store. So those sorts of things, so behavioral combined with that, and also combining demographics has been a really interesting way to come up with, okay, those best, most optimized folks that we think could be the best potential folks to go out to who have not donated before. And we continue to optimize that, and that helps the magazine group figure out, okay, if I have X amount of mailings I want to send out or X amount of emails I want to send, you know, what's the sort of sliding scale best group to go out to. And that's also something we've been iterating a lot, literally over years. So each time there's a new campaign, we'll tweak that. So Jeremy works with the folks there, and he tweaks that each time. So that's another kind of neat theme of this, is you're trying to iterate often, right? Try to narrow down your experiment, figure out this one thing, not all the things, but the one thing you're trying to learn, get the learning, and then adjust for next time, right? So that's just, I throw that out there as maybe that's helpful for folks who are coming at this from more the development side. On the engagement side, there have been lots of things over the years. On the behavioral side, social, maybe less so, but one I can think of is, so I think you know, Andrew, early on we started sort of developing our own, what we call a community database, where we would log folks that we see out there on social, and just we were trying to do the little metadata experiment ourselves. So if we see, oh, here's Brent, and he's really interested in wine, we note him down in our database and sort of tag him with that. Oh, he's interested in wine, with the thoughts that eventually, hey, it'd be fun to be able to match him with wine content or other wine enthusiast alums, that sort of thing. And there was a moment when our class reunion folks came to us, and they were just trying to source some social media volunteers, because that became a larger role, right, as the social media explosion happened. So, we were able to at least use what we had in our community database to say, hey, here's some folks you might not have thought of, right? Folks who are out there actively doing this. We had combined that social data with the institutional data, so we knew who was in their reunion year, right? And we're able to say, well, here's at least maybe a mini short list of, like Brent said, totally manual, but it's like, here are people we know about, and they were able to look through that and put that into their usual, the same things they go through to try to identify volunteers. So two small examples there, but interesting ones.
That's great, and I really like the final example there, because that clearly demonstrates that investing the manual labor of correlating people who are interested in wine with an opportunity that's wine related, that delivers value from the end user's perspective, but it is manual, so it's not going to scale, and that provides a beautiful transition into talking to Brent. Let's now move from Palo Alto to Deerfield, Massachusetts, where Brent is right now, and welcome Brent back to the show. Brent is the CEO and founder of Evertrue. He founded the company in 2010 with a vision to improve advancement by taking a mobile-first approach to connecting traditional donor databases to the social graph. Evertrue's platform has been adopted by over 150 leading institutions, including Amherst, Colgate, and Phillips Andover. Brent received his MBA with honors from Harvard Business School and his BA in International Relations from Brown University, where he served as captain of the football team. He currently serves on the board of the Brown Alumni Association and is a class agent for Harvard Business School. Brent, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm actually presenting out of a snow fort today, which is very different than Adam's backdrop, and the lights just went out in the snow fort, so I'll be right back.
All right.
All right, here we go.
Wiring in snow forts is so unreliable these days. So Brent, I've got really fond memories of a conversation with you back in 2010 or so, when we were talking about the game-changing potential of matching up social web interaction information with information in institutional databases. And as I recall, we wrapped up that conversation in agreement that while there was tremendous potential there, the incredibly manual nature of doing anything with those two sources of information made it almost impossible to do in a way that was going to impact an entire advancement organization. Since then, you and your colleagues at Evertrue have figured out a way to make this much quicker and easier. Could you tell us about GivingTree?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about it, but it really fits within this broader theme that we're referring to as social donor management, which is how does donor management, constituent relationship management adjust in a world that has become increasingly even more social. I mean, when we caught up in 2010, LinkedIn probably had 70 million users, Andrew, and now it has 277 million. In 2010, Facebook probably had maybe 500 million users. It's now well over 1 billion users, and so even in that time, there's just been this ongoing explosion of social media data, and the adoption of those platforms has really been by the core constituency of a lot of the advancement folks that we've all gotten to know. So as we look at the opportunity for social donor management, it's really just this recognition that, as Adam has already spoken about, there is a massive amount of institutional data, some of which has been gathered over decades, that is sitting in legacy systems that are very well structured, compounded by this massive increase in social data that helps answer some of these key questions about, who are these people, where do they work, what do they do, what do they care about, what are they interested in, all the same kind of data that we've historically manually tried typing either about our constituents, or as alums we've received a notification saying, please update your record in our database, or go update your record in the alumni directory, or you get a phone call on a Tuesday night at 9 o'clock from somebody who's trying to get a donation and updated data. And so it's really just looking at how social data can answer those same fundamental questions that have been being asked around offices for decades.
Fantastic. How much of your interest in this area has been informed by your own volunteer work on behalf of either HBS or by Brown?
All of it. Yeah, I mean, the origin for starting the company was really with a volunteer experience that I had in 2009. I was a student at HBS. Somebody from Brown had reached out and said, "Would you be willing to help lead your reunion fundraising campaign?" I said, "Absolutely." And I got a spreadsheet of my classmates that was filled with information that was largely out of date. And when I asked the institution, "Hey, all of this information is out of date," the response was, "Yeah, if you get updated information, could you enter it in the spreadsheet and send it back to us so we can update our system?" And this is not something that's unique to Brown. This is happening with volunteers and fundraisers themselves at offices all over the world. And so on the flip side, just at that moment, it was 2009. Facebook was maturing. LinkedIn was rapidly growing. The iPhone had just been released, so mobile was really starting to emerge, and it seemed like there was a real opportunity to sit at the intersection of institutional giving data and other metadata along with social data.
Could you walk us through how it is that GivingTree eliminates a lot of the manual burden?
Yeah.
Of trying to knit up these various data sources? Yeah,
so very simply, let's talk about two aspects of it. There's career data and there's engagement data. Forever schools have been trying to track who's engaged for all the reasons that Adam just described. It could be volunteer identification, it could be event invitations. Who's engaged? Well, how do we measure that? Historically, it's been who comes to reunions, who is helping do admissions interviews for incoming students. And in a social world, we think that should also include who liked that photo that I shared on Facebook, who responded to that tweet. On the other hand, career data has been tremendously important from a donor segmentation perspective historically, but the typical legacy database that we're working with today has inaccurate career data for roughly 98% of the records. We define accurate as it has the right company, the right job title, and the right industry. Pretty simple. But only 2% of the time we're seeing are all three of those attributes correct. And so when you look at a platform like LinkedIn, there's a huge opportunity to, without violating user privacy issues, leverage that data set to answer some of those questions about who works in finance in Chicago. We might want to go see those people. Similarly with Facebook, I might want to know who in Chicago really seems to be engaging with our Facebook content, because that person might be a volunteer. And so all across the donor pyramid, whether it's trying to understand what already known rated prospects care about, well, social donor management can help with that. If it's trying to identify a big pool of engaged non-donors, social donor management can help with that. And really just thinking about what are the questions that are already being asked and how can social data help give an answer.
And it feels to me like it would be easy to couch this particular type of approach as something that is clearly of great benefit to the institution because it enables you to devise more effective engagement strategies. But I think it's really important to link that back to the point that Adam was making early on about how from the end user's perspective you would much rather be called at 9 p.m. if people have something to share with you that you actually care about, as opposed to having it just be a generic call that you're basically just a pocketbook, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, if something in a contact note that was written about me expresses that I'm interested in football, then that might be something that someone would talk about on that phone conversation or in person. So if I've liked 20 photos from the Brown University football Facebook page, couldn't that also be the same indication that that's something that I care about and that's what I should talk about? Whereas one of my classmates likes something about the new Science Center, well, maybe that's a conversation starter for that individual that's going to be more tailored to to what we are already expressing in publicly available ways on Facebook. And so to answer, or just to go back to your question of like how all this happens, there has just been this tremendous investment by most of these leading platforms in developing APIs, which are called application programming interfaces. It's really like a pipe that connects two different systems. And so we look at the legacy database systems as the core foundation, because you know that those people are your constituents, you know how they've given over time, you know what activities they were involved with when they're on campus, but odds are you don't really know that much about who they are as professionals or what they're interested in today when you're talking about hundreds of thousands, in some cases, records. Facebook and LinkedIn and other platforms do know that information. APIs that we're connecting with help make it possible to in a more streamlined, less manual way, connect the dots between who Andrew and Adam are on the social web and who Andrew and Adam are in their respective alumni databases.
And it seems to me as though if you take full advantage of what having that data lets you do, you can create experiences that are actually very meaningful. The thing that comes to mind as I think about that is, maybe it was 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point, but it was the Facebook 10th anniversary videos. There was that day when they all went out there, and it was sort of the greatest hits of your activity on Facebook since you joined the platform. And you could imagine something similar with an individual and an institution, right? And that would mean everything. That shows that you're aware of an entire history of interaction between the person and the place in a way that I think the person takes for granted, and they're occasionally shocked when it turns out the institution doesn't know anything more about you than when you graduated.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way of putting it, and I think it is really just thinking about, if I like a piece of content or comment on content that my institution is putting out there on Facebook, I'm doing that in a public way. If I were on a phone call with a fundraiser, or if I were having coffee with a major gift officer, and I said, you know, I'm really interested in knowing more about what we're doing to support financial aid for first-generation college students, that note would be taken and logged in the database, and it would be a part of my record. If I like a news article about Brown's new initiative for financial aid for first-generation college students, that also implies, without me saying it in a one-on-one situation, that I care about that same thing. And so it's really amazing, because where we're at right now is that over the last 5 years, the institutions that we're working with have been building this piggy bank of data, whether they intentionally did so or not, where we've been posting on Facebook. You know, Cornell's a great example. You've been posting a lot of content in the Cornell Alumni Association page, and it's generating hundreds of thousands. In fact, I did an analysis before this. There have been 160,507 likes on photos and news articles that Cornell has shared on that Facebook page over the last several years. All of those tie back to about 20,000 unique Facebook users, most of whom are your alumni. And so the next step, you know, we've spent the last 5 years building the audience and building this engagement. The next 5 years are going to be about analyzing and understanding that data and actually doing something with it.
I love the way you wrap that up, because it feels to me like people whose strategy is predicated entirely on growing the size of an audience are missing the boat to a certain extent. And let me qualify what I mean by that. If all they try to do when they explain the impact that they're having is say we grew an audience, you know, that's only going to take you so far, right? If you can,
we increased likes 12% last month.
Exactly. But once having convened an audience and gotten them in the habit of engaging with you on a daily basis, if you can do something with that audience and mobilize them either as individuals or as a group on behalf of your institution, that relates directly to all of the long-standing advancement goals that have informed what we've been doing for the past century, right? So it's taking social and it's making activity on social relevant in terms that everybody in the organization already concedes is important, and I think that's a really important series of dots to connect.
Yeah, and look, one of the big challenges that we're all going to be facing is that I bet if you look at who's watching Higher Ed Live right now to talk about social and how it intersects with donor data, there are not too many VPs of development or VPs of advancement who are on the Hangout right now. If you are, I'm sorry, please tweet at us and let us know that you're out there, but I suspect that they're not, because what are they doing? They're focusing on the priorities that they have previously stated. And what are those? Major gifts from individuals, prospect research, stewardship, planned giving, increasingly top of the pyramid activities. And today, social media is viewed as a totally separate activity and initiative that is different from all those things that I just described. The opportunity for professionals in the advancement sector, I believe, is which your colleague Keith Hannon refers to as the new prospector, which is how do you look at social media through the lens of those existing strategic priorities so that senior leadership wants to hear more about it and wants to understand. Because if you can make an ROI case, instead of investing $100 a year in Facebook ads or $1,000 a year in Facebook ads, maybe there is a completely rational financial argument to be made about why you should be investing $100,000 a year in Facebook ads, which is what every big brand and for-profit company is doing right now, but it has yet to happen at the same level in the advancement sector.
Brent, thank you so much. I'm looking at the clock now, and I think that we need to let's bring Adam back into the conversation here because we're now getting into the meat of this conversation. Let's talk about this whole issue of spend. I think all of us on the Hangout here agree that Facebook is a place where we've invested an incredible amount of time over the past 5 years building the audience, getting to understand them a little bit better. One of the concerns that I've had is that as Facebook continues to muck around with the newsfeed algorithm, and our organic reach is slowly dwindling away, and they're wanting us to pay for accessing this audience we've worked so hard to build up. How do we make the case for that sort of spend? And do you see that this sort of throttling of reach is a challenge for social media, or do we just have to get better at explaining what we're getting out of it?
You want Adam to take that, or should I take that?
Well, I guess you already sort of tackled this. Let's see what Adam has to say about what you were just saying in terms of making the case for a serious spend to get this sort of information.
The only things I would add into what Brent was saying was, we think about diversifying as well, because just to your point, Andrew, you don't necessarily know what policies are going to change. You don't know sort of what networks are going to change, right? Like Facebook is going strong now, but there might be other players. I mean, there already have been, right? So how do you diversify and in your organization just make sure you're experimenting? Our social team is awesome at that, kind of keeping their eyes out, looking ahead, and sort of doing some tests and trials with what's coming next. That also, on the data side, keeps us in good shape for what data we might need from that. The other sort of piece of that, I would say, is that's, I think. Let me wrap it with that.
Great. Anything else to add on that topic, Brent?
More just, I think that the opportunity will be, so every time that somebody says, hey, Facebook is making it harder to reach the audience because of the way they're changing EdgeRank, or they're making people pay more and more to access the audience. The U.S. Postal Service has forever done a pretty good job of making us pay to access an audience, yet we've somehow been able to make a case. How have we done that? Because we are able to link the cost of sending a mailing with revenue that comes from that mailing, and so that's why we're still supporting the U.S. Postal Service in the way that we are. The challenge and the opportunity right now is to start taking some of this data and do the exact same thing by starting small, running experiments, and saying, hey, I just identified, here's an example of an experiment that I hope that we can do with Brown soon. We've identified 1,433 people who've engaged with Brown's Facebook content who've never made a gift, ever. Okay? 1,433 people. We also know that people who have engaged with Facebook content are 40% more likely to give. So this is a group that is just a ripe audience that should be giving, and they're not today, and we need to figure out why. If we can run some experiments where we spend, instead of sending those same people a mailing, we send those same people a Facebook ad, and we can measure the return on that ad the same way that we can measure the return on our mailing, that is how, as a sector, we will be able to make the case for shifting spend from traditional to digital Similarly, it may be that that 1,433 would be a great group to get a traditional print mailing, because we can link the fact that they're more likely to respond to some of Adam's points already. And so it's really, again, the next phase is, once we understand this data, let's identify and make some quick wins so that we can then go back to leadership with data and request more budget with the sense of what it's going to get us.
I really like that example you just outlined because of its potential to let you do a reasonably effective apples-to-apples comparison of return on that particular ad spend versus your average return on a mailing. I think that's just a useful way of framing initiatives like that to decision makers. I've been there's a crowdfunding startup I've been talking to recently that very explicitly explains their pricing as being comparable with what it would cost you to do one major annual fund mailing.
Yeah.
And that makes sense, right? Because then you can clearly compare the return that you already know from that mailing against what you get from a year's worth of subscription to this platform, and that can make the case very simple if you have good numbers. And if you don't have good numbers, then that's useful information too, because you stop worrying about it.
Yep.
Adam, how do you think about experiments like that?
Yeah, I mean, we try to make the environment fairly free to do experiments and to be able to keep on learning, I would say. Understanding, I mean, as I was hearing Brent talk, I was too thinking of, like, over time, it would be great if the machines were as good as the people in sort of recognizing someone and understanding what's important to them. So it's like little steps to sort of get us closer and closer, little steps to get us to understand. Also, as Brent was saying, sort of who is in our following. One thing we've been really careful to do as we built, our guys have done a great job building out our Facebook and our Twitter channels, is just to really build them slowly and organically and really build a community there. So that also maybe gives us a little more insurance as to what Facebook is doing and maybe even on the cost side. But I think it would be sort of small experiments, really understanding who those folks are. Back to what I was saying earlier, tying that into our behavioral segmentation model. One of the ideas we've been thinking about is we had tortured some interns last summer, and they actually were doing things in much more manual ways than the elegant ways Brent is talking about, but actually found some of the least engaged. It would be the equivalent of what you're talking about, Brent, but more from the engagement perspective. So folks who have really never traditionally engaged with the Alumni Association who are actively on our Facebook channels, right? And we did it more as a sampling. We're sure there are more out there. And then that sort of leads us to, oh gosh, then what do we do with those folks? We could go two different ways. You try to think content strategy-wise of doing something different or appealing to those folks. Do you try to think of something else in the greater social media realm, kind of a new product for those folks? Or do you almost go the other way, and we know who those folks in that one of our most least engaged segments in the database, we know all those individuals. We could actually go out and find them and see what they're doing, if they're doing something on social media, i.e. what they're tweeting about, what they're blogging about, what pictures they're posting, and maybe try to engage them sort of one-on-one. So, direct community management kind of experiments. So we haven't done that yet, but we're kind of trying to figure out what might be the next step there. But in terms of resources and freedom to do that, I think we're fairly in good shape. Ideally, any of these things are sort of lower resource. I mean, even sort of testing iterative ad campaigns, right, across Facebook. Amy, who works here in our group, has done a lot of great work with that in partnership with our departments. And we learn every time, and that learning then can be shared with other departments, right? So everybody's sharing that learning, and it sort of maximizes the dollars, and the dollars, frankly, aren't that much as we go through. So that's kind of nice.
Let's talk a little bit about organizational maturity and what you need to have in place, either in terms of staff resources or in terms of philosophical openness to asking these sorts of questions. What do you think the baseline things that you need to have to be able to start thinking about these sorts of issues productively are? And I guess where I'm going with this is that it feels to me like oftentimes initiatives like this end up failing because you've got fundraisers who think that stuff relating to the web and communications, that's not their problem. They just need to worry about the 100 people in their portfolio. You've got communications folks who feel like they don't have to worry about people's giving history because that's the fundraiser's job. And it feels to me like you can't actually engage with the potential that's right there in front of us if you're defending your silos like that and have a very blinkered sense of what is your job and what isn't.
Mm-hmm. Our take on this is we hope that as we go from the last 5 years being building the audience, the next 5 years understanding the data, that all of a sudden the communications team that's been putting out what is hopefully great content and building this big audience and generating all of these interactions, well, guess what? Some of those interactions happened, if I'm a major gift officer, by the 100 people in my portfolio. And while I may be skeptical of Facebook or social media, again, when they're positioned as a vacuum, if you were to tell me, hey, Brent, did you know that 7 of your prospects seem to really care about the new science initiative? I would want to know more. And if it just so happens that Facebook is the way that you learned that, or that LinkedIn is the way that you learned that, it's just as relevant as if you happen to sit with those 7 people at homecoming around a table and they told you that they were all interested in that initiative. And so I think that, again, it's major gift officers shouldn't care about social media. They should care about what it takes to achieve their goals. And if social media happens to assist them along the way, that's the opportunity for this to all come together, as opposed to it being in a vacuum.
Well put.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say, I totally agree with that, and it'd be kind of cool to think about down the road, you know, totally agree with Brent, it doesn't matter where it comes from, and you could think about, just in that example, again, we don't do fundraising here, but to think about, you know, there are humans compiling that top 100 list right now, right? So what if we were able to have the systems that could take all the data from all these streams that we've been talking about today, and then crank out a machine-generated top 100 optimized list, you know? How would that compare to the human one, right? Could that identify some folks who aren't on the top 100, and that's a good place to start. Why aren't they? That's kind of interesting. Why don't we know about this person? Goes for engagement too. Top 100 volunteer prospects, top attendees, top 1,000 attendees. Oh, we didn't think of these. We missed these. So there are ways that I think, even talking maybe in science fiction terms like that right now, even if you can't do it, you could start maybe changing some of the mindset, right? Changing some of the culture to think about that and be curious about that if they're not already. So maybe even something people can do to get started, if they're thinking this might be overwhelming, I don't know where to start, is to just start, you know, open that conversation with your organization and start getting people in the habit of maybe asking data-driven hypotheses, you know, asking data-driven questions and forming hypotheses that could be tested, right?
And one of the other nice ways to frame this, I think, in terms of getting people to understand what you're trying to do and getting people institutional buy-in is framing these online communities as alumni communities that are fundamentally, it's not that they aren't different from the conventional communities that we're used to, such as classes or regional associations, but they are communities of people who are connected to the university, who are the same people who we know and love in their class and their club context. They're just in a different place, and what we need to do is to figure out how we can work with these communities, which sometimes are extremely large, relatively speaking, compared to the conventional communities, and work with them in all the range of ways we work with the classes and the clubs to advance a range of institutional goals. So Brent, I think your example is great of a gift officer going to a class dinner or an athletic event and pouring through the people who are there to figure out which people are relevant to their portfolios and then trying to get information that they can use to do their job, right? And so you can imagine that from a volunteer manager's perspective, there's one set of goals you can try to achieve working with one of these communities. Gift officer, same thing. Researcher, same deal. Yeah. We just do our work, the same jobs we've always tried to work towards, with a different set of tools in a different place.
And the opportunity for leverage through this technology is so massive. The best event that you would throw, you know, let's say it attracts 1,000 people, or you know, maybe there are a couple that are bigger, but like you can get through great content 1,000 people to engage with Facebook, and you can do that at a fraction of the cost, and one person can do that, and there doesn't need to be as much planning and just all the time invested. I mean, why do we put on great events? It's to build community, engage people, and bring them together, which ultimately allow us to segment our population and either identify volunteers or big donors over time. That's the same reason we should be building these digital audiences. And it's just such an exciting time because it's just about to get so much more scalable, and it's going to be possible soon to just make clear cases about ROI from time savings, from prospect identification, from field fundraiser efficiency across the board. Social is going to transform advancement the same way that it's transforming every other industry in the planet right now. It's just taking a little bit longer to get here.
But at the same time, if you think about how long it took advancement to wrap its head around email, that was a slow and painful process, right? And eventually we got there. And I feel like when people are understandably panicked about the ROI question and how do we justify this, we have to remind ourselves to be patient, because while the shift of people into social happened almost overnight, relatively speaking, it's naturally going to take us a while to figure out how to make this work for us in terms of our business goals. Yeah,
and look, now is the time. I mean, you're both at institutions that are on an extreme end of the spectrum, but over 70% of both of your populations are on Facebook. Over 60% of both of your populations are on LinkedIn. That wasn't the case even 2 years ago, 4 years ago. It is now. You know, the scales have tipped, and so now is the time to be looking for that next wave.
Adam, any last words? We're closing in on the hour.
No, I think it's not as hard to get started as you might think. Sometimes it's just about kicking off the conversation with your organization and others across campus, folks like Brent, others, that can just start getting some ideas and hypotheses flowing. So good luck to folks out there.
Any last words, Brent?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, find out what your boss really cares about, and think about ways that social media, social data can align with what your boss already cares about versus making your boss care about what you care about, which might be social media. And so really just trying to think about how we can support the pre-existing priorities of our organization so that it isn't an us versus them. It's us working together. I think that's going to be the next chapter in the story.
That absolutely lines up with my experience, and I think you're bang on target right there. Brent and Adam, thank you so much. As always, it's a real pleasure to talk to both of you independently, and talking to both of you at the same time is pretty fantastic. I hope we can do it again sometime soon. We are now at the end of our hour. This is the last episode of Advancement Live. Sorry. I will be back in 2 weeks with the great lineup of guests who used to work in higher ed social media. We're having a social media month on Higher Ed Live, and these folks are all veterans of higher ed, but they are now working in the private sector. And I'm going to have a conversation with them in which we engage in a gentle critique of the way things work in higher ed based on their new perspectives from the private sector. And they're also going to talk to us about some of the things that they think we're doing pretty darn well. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Once again, thank you to our sponsor, iModules. And as always, you can watch more shows from Advancement Pros on the Advancement Live archive located at higheredlive.com. Thanks to everybody who tuned in live, and see you next time. Once again, Brent and Adam, thank you.
Thanks, guys.